The town had long stopped asking questions. No candlelight vigils. No missing posters on telephone poles. Just names, 4 of them, faded into quiet whispers at church picnics and beneath breathy conversations in the grocery aisle. But Officer Micah Bishop's K-9 partner, Juno, didn't forget. It was supposed to be a routine walkthrough, a clearance check before Crescent Falls finally demolished the old Harmony Street Community Center, an aging brick building that had been shuttered for nearly a decade. Rats, mold, asbestos. Nothing more. But then Juno froze. Nose twitching, ears perked, his body stiffened just outside the building's side door. Micah's boots crunched on broken glass as he stepped closer. "You got something, boy," he muttered. Juno let out a low, insistent bark. One. Then another. And that's when Micah saw it. Buried halfway under a crumbled pile of bricks and drywall, a red knitted scarf, tattered, but still intact. He crouched down, brushing off the dirt with a gloved hand. His breath caught. There was a monogram embroidered at the edge. E.B. Micah knew that scarf. It had belonged to Eleanor Briggs, 63 years old when she vanished 7 years ago, the first of 4 older women who disappeared without a trace from Crescent Falls over the past decade. No signs of struggle. No suspects. Each time, the explanation had been the same: she probably wandered off. Dementia, they'd whispered. Confused. Probably got lost in the woods. But Juno wasn't sniffing out ghosts. The scent trail led them around the back of the building where Micah found an old storm door, locked shut with rusted chains. It took a crowbar, 2 curses, and Juno's impatient whine to get it open. The smell hit immediately: mildew, decay, something chemical. The stairs creaked as they descended into the dark, Juno leading the way like a shadow with purpose. Micah clicked on his flashlight. The basement was mostly empty: old plastic chairs, a few file cabinets, collapsed ceiling tiles. But in the far corner, Juno stopped again. This time, he growled low. Micah followed his gaze. There, behind a wall of cardboard boxes, was something that shouldn't be there. A broken cot. A plastic bin filled with clothes. A worn orthopedic shoe. He shone the flashlight directly on it. "Jesus," he whispered. The shoe matched the one listed in the missing persons file for Lillian Carter, 58 years old. Vanished in 2014. Micah stood in silence, heart thudding. This wasn't some urban legend. This wasn't just 4 unrelated disappearances. It was a pattern. And it was starting right here, in the forgotten basement of a forgotten building. The town had missed it. The sheriff's department had missed it. Hell, even Micah had once believed the simplest explanation was probably the right one. But Juno hadn't. That night, Micah filed an internal report and bagged the scarf and shoe for forensic testing. But something gnawed at him. If someone had been keeping women here, why? And more importantly, how had no one noticed? He spent the next morning poring through the old case files. One by one, the names lined up. Eleanor Briggs, 63, lived alone, last seen walking to the grocery store. Lillian Carter, 58, a widow, last seen at the community center's book club. Agnes Powell, 61, disappeared after her volunteer shift at the senior clinic. Shirley Monroe, 67, known to walk daily around the block, vanished in broad daylight. No bodies. No suspects. All cases marked cold. Micah made a list of every location the women had visited in the weeks leading up to their disappearances. One name kept popping up: the old community center. He picked up the phone and called the town clerk, requesting access to visitor sign-in logs from before it closed in 2017. "Not sure if we still have those," the clerk said. "But if we do, they'd be in storage behind the town library." By 2 p.m., Micah and Juno were digging through cardboard boxes in a dusty, dim-lit storage room. Juno's nose twitched as he circled the perimeter, sniffing, stopping briefly near a crate filled with old coffee urns and church banners. Then, he barked. Micah rushed over. Juno was pawing at a corner baseboard. Micah pried it loose and found, tucked behind it, a thin spiral notebook wrapped in plastic. Inside, pages of names, ages, and physical notes. Dates. Locations. And next to some of the entries, a check mark. Micah flipped through, his pulse quickening. At the very bottom of one page, written in cramped handwriting. EB, compliant, diabetic, quiet. June 22, 16, cleared. This wasn't random. This was systematic. Someone had been profiling women, older, alone, vulnerable, and selecting them. For what, Micah didn't know yet. But the presence of Juno had changed everything. The K-9's instincts had turned hearsay into evidence, and that basement into a crime scene. Micah drove home that night with Juno in the back seat, eyes alert, tail still. As they passed the quiet homes and tree-lined streets of Crescent Falls, he realized something chilling. The town hadn't forgotten these women. It had chosen to. It rained that night. Not the kind of heavy storm that rattles windows, but a quiet, steady drizzle that slicked the streets of Crescent Falls and softened the air with that earthy scent only small towns seem to remember. Officer Micah Bishop sat alone in his patrol cruiser outside the station, replaying the discovery in his head. The scarf. The shoe. The logbook notebook Juno had uncovered behind the storage room baseboard. There was no mistaking it now, someone had been watching these women. Tracking them. Possibly selecting them. And for all those years, the town had looked the other way. Inside the station, Micah laid out 4 manila folders, each one marked with the name of a missing woman. He stared at them in silence, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Juno lay by his feet, calm but alert. Every few minutes, he'd lift his head as if sensing Micah's unease. The dog was more than a partner, he was a compass. A quiet reminder that instinct sometimes saw more than evidence. Micah reached into the box of documents they'd recovered and flipped to a second page in the spiral notebook. There were more names, not from Crescent Falls, but nearby towns, Millridge, Klamath Springs, East Hill. Next to several of them were addresses. Some had check marks. Others were circled. The last entry read, Shirley Monroe, pending eval. No family. Follows routine. A chill ran down his spine. He remembered that name well. Shirley was the last woman to go missing, almost 3 years ago to the day. No one had seen her after she left the local senior center following her Tai Chi class. Everyone assumed she'd gotten disoriented. Maybe wandered into the woods. Now, that explanation seemed almost insulting. Micah picked up his phone and called the only person he knew who never stopped asking questions, Kate Delaney, the local librarian. Hey Kate, it's Micah. You still working late? Always. What's up? I need access to the old activity rosters from the community center, anything you've got from 2010 to 2017. There was a pause. That's oddly specific. You working a cold case? Something like that. Kate agreed to meet him in 30 minutes. By 9:15 p.m., Micah and Juno were combing through binders and hand-scribbled attendance sheets on the back tables of the Crescent Falls Library. The place smelled like lemon polish and old books, a strangely comforting contrast to the weight of the investigation. I didn't think anyone still cared about those cases, Kate said quietly. Micah didn't look up. I didn't either. Until Juno found something. Juno sniffed the edges of a box near the corner of the room, then pawed once at a slim manila envelope taped beneath the lowest drawer. Kate raised her brows. What the? Micah peeled the tape and pulled it loose. Inside were 6 photocopied driver's licenses. Each belonged to a woman aged between 56 and 68. 4 of them were from Crescent Falls. 2 were from Millridge. All were now on his list. This wasn't lost, Micah muttered. This was hidden. It was nearly midnight when Micah finally returned home. He poured himself a lukewarm cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table while Juno curled up on the rug nearby. He pulled out the map of Crescent County and began marking the locations where each woman had last been seen. A pattern emerged, not random, but tight, almost methodical. Each woman had vanished within a 5-mile radius of Harmony Street, and almost all had visited the senior outreach van run by the community center. That van, long since retired, had once provided check-ins for elderly residents. Blood pressure screenings. Meal deliveries. Friendly chats. It was run by a small rotating group of volunteers, but one name stood out. Leonard Shaw. A former nurse practitioner. Moved to Crescent Falls in 2009. Licensed revoked in 2011 after inconsistencies in paperwork. No criminal record, but a reputation around town for being too involved. Micah's pen paused over the name. He'd seen Shaw around. Kept to himself. Always at the hardware store on Wednesdays. Always polite. Always invisible. The next morning, Micah didn't bother with dispatch. He and Juno were already heading toward the outskirts of town, where Shaw lived in a rusted single-story ranch house tucked behind a half-collapsed barn. Micah parked at the edge of the gravel road. "Let's keep it friendly," he whispered to Juno, slipping the leash on. "Just sniff around. We're not barging in." Juno walked with measured steps, his ears twitching as they approached the porch. The dog slowed near the left side of the house, head tilting toward an old cellar door sealed shut with chain links. Micah crouched low. Scrape marks. Fresh ones. He gently pulled Juno back and walked up to knock. No answer. He knocked again, louder. "Mr. Shaw?" "It's Officer Bishop. Just checking in on some local files." Still silence. Juno growled. Then, footsteps inside. Micah stepped back and put a hand on his belt. Before he could knock a third time, a tired voice called out, "Coming." The door opened an inch. Leonard Shaw stood there, face pale, hair unkempt. "Oh. Officer, is something wrong?" "I'm following up on some questions about the old community center. Thought you might have records or insights. Mind if I come in?" Shaw hesitated. Then opened the door fully. "Of course. Come in." But Juno didn't move. He stood on the threshold, nose lifted, staring hard at the hallway. Inside, the house was cluttered but neat. Shaw poured Micah a glass of water while insisting he hadn't kept any logs from the outreach program. It was too long ago. Most of those women, they just stopped answering the door. Micah nodded, letting the silence drag. Then, casually, he asked, "Did you ever meet Eleanor Briggs?" Shaw blinked. "Briggs? I think so. Diabetic, right? Nice lady. She wore a red scarf everywhere. Ring a bell?" A beat of pause. "No," Shaw said. "I don't think so." Micah stared. Juno growled. Back outside, Micah didn't say a word. He opened the tailgate of his SUV and let Juno loose into the back field behind Shaw's house. It took the dog less than 2 minutes to stop cold near the old storm shelter under the barn. He barked once, pawed at the hatch, then sat. Not aggressively, but insistently. Micah pulled out his phone. "Dispatch, this is Bishop. I'm going to need backup." The wind howled through the alley behind the Crescent Falls Public Library, swirling leaves into small, chaotic dances. The town had settled into its autumn hush, porch lights flickering on, dinner plates clinking through open windows. But inside the cold, concrete-walled storage annex behind the library, Micah Bishop wasn't thinking about supper. He was elbow-deep in old town records, inventory sheets, and dusty visitor logs from the now-demolished community center. Next to him, Juno paced with slow determination, his nose dragging low across the cracked linoleum floor. 3 women. 3 different years. All of them over 50. All of them last seen in or near the same community center. Micah knew this wasn't coincidence anymore. And Juno was about to prove it. The dog suddenly halted near a stack of forgotten banker boxes, tail rigid. He gave one sharp bark. Micah snapped out of his thoughts. "What is it, buddy?" he asked, moving quickly. Juno began pawing at the base of the metal cabinet. Micah dropped to his knees and felt along the back wall. His hand caught on a loose panel, plywood, warped with age, held in place by a bent nail. Behind it was a plastic grocery bag sealed with duct tape. Micah's heart beat faster. He peeled the tape back. Inside were several things: a purple eyeglasses case, a small bottle of prescription pills labeled Lillian Carter, and a thin, spiral-bound notebook, nearly falling apart at the spine. The same name that had been on one of the checklists he found in the community center's basement. He opened the notebook. The handwriting was faint but legible. June 4, 14, Miss Carter responded well to intake. No family contact. Pre-existing conditions: arthritis, type 2 diabetes, stage 1 kidney failure. Fit for relocation. Observed, compliant. Micah closed the notebook slowly, jaw tight. This wasn't just observation. It was profiling. Someone was collecting medical histories, vetting women who were alone, vulnerable, and quiet enough to disappear without making noise. And these weren't police reports. They were personal notes. Someone local. Someone careful. That night, back at the precinct, Micah sat in the evidence room reviewing every cold case he could find that mentioned older women. He taped their photos on the whiteboard: Eleanor Briggs, Lillian Carter, Agnes Powell, and Shirley Monroe. He added sticky notes beneath each: last known location, physical condition, family ties, or lack thereof. Patterns began to emerge. All lived alone. All had chronic medical issues. All were involved in local volunteer work or services. It was almost like someone had curated a list of Crescent Falls' most invisible women. Juno lay curled at his feet, silent but alert. Micah knew what this was starting to look like. But he still had no answers, no motive, no suspect, and no bodies. The next morning, a tip came in from someone Micah didn't expect: Kate Monroe, a young woman who worked the front desk at the Crescent Falls Senior Outreach Office. She called his desk directly. "Officer Bishop, I think you need to see something. It's probably nothing, but it gave me the creeps." Micah drove over immediately. Kate met him at the reception area, her expression guarded. She was holding an old intake folder, yellowed, creased, and marked "Private" in red Sharpie. "I found this buried in a drawer nobody's used since before I started here," she explained. "There's no digital copy. But look at the signature." Micah opened the folder. At the bottom of the intake sheet was a name written in tight cursive. Leonard M. Shaw. Micah's blood ran cold. He'd seen the name before, in one of the dead-end referrals inside Eleanor Briggs' medical file. Shaw was a retired physician, reportedly living off the grid just south of the county line. "He used to run free checkups for seniors here," Kate continued. "Before my time. Just disappeared one day. No warning. Just stopped coming." Juno, standing beside Micah, growled low. Micah looked up at Kate. "Did anyone ever investigate him?" Kate shook her head. "We didn't think we had reason to." Micah copied the address listed in the folder, even though it was likely outdated. It was more than he'd had in days. He didn't go alone. Micah called in Deputy Ray Morrison for backup, and together with Juno, they drove down the old county road, gravel popping beneath the tires. The listed address was a weathered ranch house tucked behind a grove of dying aspens. The mailbox had no name. The gate was rusted open. No vehicle in sight. Micah drew his weapon as he approached, Juno leading at a steady crawl, ears perked forward. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house smelled stale, a mixture of bleach, mothballs, and something faintly metallic. The living room was nearly empty, save for a cracked recliner and an old medical chart holder mounted on the wall. Files were missing. The few remaining had blank labels. Juno sniffed toward the hallway and then lunged toward the bedroom closet. Micah followed quickly, pulling the door open. Inside, shelves filled with boxes labeled by year. Micah grabbed one marked 2015 and opened it on the floor. Inside were a folder labeled, Powell. Medical transcripts. A pair of silver hoop earrings in a Ziploc bag. A VHS tape labeled, Intake, Powell. Micah looked at Ray. "This isn't just a doctor's home," he said grimly. "This is a collection room." Over the next 2 hours, they gathered what they could. Dozens of files. Half a dozen labeled tapes. One burned phone. But the house had been cleared recently. Whoever lived here had known someone might come. It wasn't a crime scene, it was a vacated operation. Still, Juno lingered outside the back door, sniffing near the woodpile. He began digging until his claws scraped something hard, a plastic storage container, sealed tight. Inside, more personal items, scarves, rings, pill bottles, all belonging to the missing women. But also, photos. Printed, grainy pictures taken without consent. And in one of them, barely visible in the background, was a man's face. Half-turned, wearing wire-rimmed glasses. Micah held it up to the light. "Got you," he whispered. The clinic looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. Tucked just outside the old industrial zone at the edge of Crescent Falls, it stood half-hidden behind overgrown weeds and a sagging chain-link fence. The sign above the door still read Pine Ridge Health and Wellness, though the letters had begun to peel and fade. The town record said it had shut down 6 years ago. The boarded windows said no one was meant to remember it. But Juno remembered something. He stood alert near the front steps, nose quivering in the air, ears locked forward. Micah had seen that posture before. It was Juno's way of telling him, "We're close now." The trail that led them there had started 2 days earlier. A forensic report confirmed that the orthopedic shoe found in the old community center belonged to Lillian Carter. And inside the tongue of that shoe, tucked beneath the sole, Micah found something strange, a folded medical receipt from 2016, listing Pine Ridge as the provider. But that wasn't the odd part. The receipt had been for a blood test, ordered by a Dr. L. Shaw, a name Micah hadn't seen in any official capacity since the clinic closed. The database listed no medical license under that name in the state anymore. The number on the receipt went to a disconnected line. Micah hadn't said much at the precinct. The sheriff still saw this case as half-cooked. But Micah trusted one thing above all, Juno's instincts. So now, here they were, standing in front of a condemned medical building that somehow connected 4 missing women in a town that had worked hard to forget them. Micah pried open the back door with a crowbar while Juno sniffed the perimeter. The stale air inside reeked of rot, mildew, and disinfectant. Nature had started reclaiming the building, roots cracking through linoleum, a possum's nest in the reception desk. He scanned the walls with his flashlight. Cabinets hung open. Drawers were missing. But when Juno padded down a narrow hallway and stopped outside exam room 3, Micah felt his gut twist. The door had 3 deadbolts. On a patient room? Micah popped the lock and stepped inside. The room was stripped bare except for an old metal table bolted to the center of the floor. Beside it sat a wheeled tray with faded smudges where instruments once lay. In the corner, a stained vinyl recliner, the kind you'd expect to see in a dialysis clinic. Juno sniffed the recliner and barked once, sharply. That's when Micah noticed the discoloration on the base of the chair. A dark, rusty stain. Blood. Micah backed out slowly, his mind racing. This wasn't just a place for checkups or prescriptions. Someone had used this room, purposefully. He radioed for backup but knew they wouldn't come quickly. Not for a closed case full of cold trails and old women no one wanted to talk about. So he did what he always did. He trusted Juno. Juno led him to the basement. The stairs creaked underfoot, and the walls grew damp as they descended into the dark. The basement was partially flooded, the floor slick with murky water, wires dangling like vines. At the far end of the hallway, Juno scratched at a door labeled supply storage. Micah forced it open. Inside, beneath a collapsed shelf, lay a heavy plastic tote, taped shut. Juno backed away, whimpering faintly. Micah lifted the lid. Inside were 7 small manila folders, sealed in plastic. He opened the first one. Name, Eleanor Briggs. Age, 63. Blood type, AB+. Medications, atenolol, glipizide. Status, cleared. His hands went cold. He flipped through the next folders. Lillian Carter. Agnes Powell. Shirley Monroe. All 4 names matched the missing women. But there were 3 others, women Micah didn't recognize. He wrote their names down. More victims? Each file read like a pre-op checklist: blood type, health history, vitals. No notes about mental health. No emergency contacts. Just clinical statistics and checkmarks. This wasn't about helping these women. This was screening. Back at his office that night, Micah dug deeper. He searched state archives, old employee registries, anything tied to Dr. Leonard Shaw. After hours of digging, he finally found a record. Dr. Leonard M. Shaw, medical license revoked in 2015 after multiple ethical violations involving elderly patients at assisted living facilities across 2 counties. No criminal charges were filed. He had simply vanished after surrendering his credentials. But Micah also found something else. A real estate record showing Shaw had purchased a small mobile home under a shell company 3 months before Pine Ridge closed. The property was still listed as active, a half-acre lot outside town, near the hills. Micah didn't wait for morning. It was almost 1 a.m. when he and Juno arrived. The trailer looked abandoned, but Juno circled it like a heat-seeking missile. He barked twice, then 3 times near the back window. Micah pushed the door open, flashlight sweeping across peeling wallpaper and half-eaten TV dinners. Then he saw it. A locked metal cabinet bolted into the wall. Inside were rows of videotapes, each labeled with dates and initials. Micah pulled one labeled EB, June 22, 16, and slid it into an old VCR still connected to a dusty TV in the corner. The footage was grainy. A room, sterile. Eleanor Briggs sat in the recliner, scared but calm. Off camera, a man asked her to state her name, age, and whether she consented to a voluntary health evaluation. She looked confused. Then nodded. The tape cut out. Micah sat still for a long moment. This wasn't just a predator, it was someone who masked exploitation behind the language of care. Someone who knew how to move undetected. And the town had let it happen. As dawn approached, Micah drove back to Crescent Falls. Juno sat in the passenger seat this time, ears flicking toward every sound. The sun was just starting to rise behind the trees when Micah pulled over, parked, and sat in silence for a long moment. He looked at Juno. We're not just dealing with a missing persons case anymore, buddy. He popped the trunk and opened his evidence bag, pulling out the folders. This is a pattern. A system. And we're gonna burn it down. Juno licked his hand once, as if in agreement. Micah stared at the rising light. And for the first time in years, Crescent Falls was about to remember what it had buried. The leaves had started to change in Crescent Falls, but the air didn't feel like autumn, it felt heavier. As if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to come up from the soil it had buried long ago. For Officer Micah Bishop, it wasn't the changing season that kept him awake. It was what Juno had found. The scarf. The shoe. The basement. And now, a survivor. 3 days earlier, Micah had gotten the call from a social worker in New Mexico. She worked at a transitional housing center for elderly women, runaways, victims of domestic abuse, or just people trying to start over. A new resident had checked in under the name Elaine Benton, but her intake paperwork didn't sit right. No family contacts. No ID older than 5 years. And when the social worker asked where she was from, the woman froze. She eventually answered, Colorado. A town called Crescent Falls. The name had slipped out like a wound reopening. Micah and Juno drove 12 hours straight. No sirens. No backup. Just a growing sense that this moment, could break open everything. The facility sat at the edge of Santa Fe. Unmarked buildings, simple garden paths, buzzing porch lights. Micah entered alone while Juno stayed outside with a caregiver. The director walked him down a quiet hallway and paused at a blue door marked 214. She's skittish, she whispered. Hasn't spoken much. But when we showed her your badge number, she said she'd talk. Micah knocked softly. The door opened partway. Behind it stood a thin woman in her late 60s. Her hair was gray, her shoulders slightly hunched, but there was something familiar in her eyes. Mrs. Briggs, he asked gently. She didn't answer at first. Her fingers trembled at the edge of the door. Then, in a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in years, she whispered. I told them not to keep looking for me. He said if anyone came, we'd all disappear. They sat at the kitchen table. No cuffs. No tape recorder. Just 2 mugs of lukewarm tea and a notebook Micah didn't open. Eleanor Briggs hadn't died. She hadn't wandered into the woods. She had been taken. He wasn't what he seemed, she began. Called himself Mr. Dalton. Said he ran a senior outreach program. Drove me to appointments, brought groceries, made me feel safe. Then one day, she said, he asked if she wanted to visit a wellness retreat, a weekend getaway for widowed women, free of charge. I didn't have anyone. And I said yes. What followed sounded more like a prison than a retreat. An isolated cabin. Locked rooms. Medical screenings. Women forced into silence and compliance through a combination of sedation, threats, and something Eleanor only referred to as the routine. I didn't know what it was for, she said. They never said. But I remember being told I was too valuable to waste. Micah felt his chest tighten. Whatever Mr. Dalton had been running, it wasn't just targeting women. It was harvesting them. Micah asked the question he'd feared all along. How did you get out? Eleanor didn't speak for several seconds. One of the others, Shirley, I think, started having seizures. They rushed her out. The door was left open. I ran. 4 hours. Ended up on a highway outside Taos. A truck driver picked me up. She never gave her real name again. She was afraid they'd find her, or worse, find the others. That night, Micah sat in a cheap motel room, staring at the ceiling fan while Juno slept at his feet. Every instinct told him to go back to Colorado and storm whatever was left of that operation. But something told him it wouldn't be that easy. The people behind this weren't amateurs. They had money. They had time. And they knew how to make people disappear. Back in Crescent Falls, Micah and Juno revisited the places where each missing woman had last been seen. Juno kept circling one spot in particular, the back lot of an old private medical clinic, closed 5 years ago. Its owner, Dr. Leonard Shaw, had lost his license for record-keeping violations, then vanished. Micah filed a request for a search warrant. In the meantime, he walked Juno around the perimeter. That's when the dog stopped, again. Near a pile of broken pallets, Juno began digging, pawing furiously at the dirt. Micah joined him, heart pounding. Buried less than a foot deep was a plastic bag filled with medical tags, each one bearing initials. LC. AP. SM. EB. Micah froze. They were the initials of the 4 missing women. And one more. MW. A name that hadn't appeared in any police report. Back at the station, Micah ran the initials through the regional missing persons database. The 5th set, MW, matched a Margaret Wells, 59, who disappeared from a nearby town in 2016. No one had ever connected her case to Crescent Falls. Until now. The circle was widening. The evidence, Juno's alerts, the buried tags, Eleanor's testimony, gave Micah the leverage he needed. A federal task force agreed to assist. Within days, agents were combing through real estate records, shell companies, and offshore medical suppliers connected to Dr. Shaw. But no arrests yet. No faces. No location. Just whispers and trails half a decade cold. That night, Micah opened his laptop and wrote one name in the middle of a blank screen. Dalton. He stared at it for a long time. Find him, he said, looking at Juno. The dog lifted his head, eyes sharp. And Micah swore he could see it in his face, Juno wasn't done. The ceremony wasn't flashy. No cameras. No politicians. Just folding chairs on the lawn behind the Crescent Falls Town Library, paper cups of coffee, and a podium that wobbled when tapped. But every seat was full. They weren't there for politics. They were there for the dog. At the front of the crowd, K9 Juno sat at attention beside Officer Micah Bishop, the two of them side by side as always. A bronze plaque had just been unveiled, fixed to a smooth granite stone in the newly created Hope Garden. The plaque read, "In honor of K9 Juno, who followed the scent no one else could smell." It had taken months to get here. After uncovering the truth behind the disappearances of 4 women over the age of 50, Eleanor Briggs, Lillian Carter, Agnes Powell, and Shirley Monroe, Micah and Juno had helped expose a dark network that had preyed on the vulnerable for years. A man named Dr. Leonard Shaw, along with accomplices in 2 other states, had run a fraudulent elder care operation that had trafficked older women for illegal medical experimentation and organ harvesting. Most of the victims had vanished silently, their trails cold before anyone even started looking. But it was Juno who brought it all back to the surface. Literally. He'd found the scarf. He'd unearthed the shoe. He'd alerted to the notebook. And when the pressure came to back off, to stop digging into a case that had no headlines left, Juno had stood his ground. And so had Micah. What they uncovered had shocked the state. Turns out, Dr. Shaw wasn't working alone. Over time, he'd created a network of fake retirement referrals and wellness counselors who targeted older women in small towns, especially widows or those with no immediate family. The women were promised safety. They were given rides. Then they disappeared. 3 of the 4 missing women had been confirmed as victims of the ring. But one, Shirley Monroe, was never found. Her name remained carved into the garden stone beneath the word, "Still Missing." Never forgotten. The garden itself was Marjorie Daniels' idea, a retired nurse and town councilwoman who had followed the case from day one. "We need to do more than mourn," she said. "We need to protect." So now, tucked behind the library, just a few steps from where Juno first barked at the scent trail months ago, stood Hope Garden, a living memorial and education space. Young volunteers planted rose bushes in honor of each woman. Benches were placed in the shade, with laminated pamphlets about elder safety, fraud awareness, and hotlines for reporting abuse. And right in the center stood Juno, real and breathing, heroic, but humble. After the ceremony, as people began to mingle and murmur, Micah crouched beside his partner. "You did good, buddy," he whispered, rubbing behind Juno's ears. "You found the truth when the rest of us were looking the other way." Juno gave one soft chuff and leaned into his partner's side. Later that week, Micah stood in the hallway of a small assisted living center just outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. It had taken months, careful searching, and help from the FBI's Missing Persons Unit, but Agnes Powell was alive. She'd escaped the network 6 years ago, living under a new name, too afraid to return, too unsure of who to trust. But when she saw Juno's photo in a newspaper article, she made the call. "I didn't think anyone cared anymore," she told Micah through tears. "But that dog, he found what nobody else wanted to." She had stories to tell. Records to give. And best of all, she wasn't alone anymore. Back in Crescent Falls, Micah sat in the break room of the police department, watching Juno chew through a new indestructible toy, a reward from the mayor. Officer Naomi Garcia, his partner on paper but back up in heart, leaned in the doorway. "You realize that dog just cracked open a 10-year-old conspiracy," she said, sipping her coffee. Micah shrugged. "He just follows his nose." Naomi grinned. "Then maybe the rest of us should start following his lead." The case didn't end with the garden. More women were identified. Some still missing. Some found under false names in shelters across the country. The FBI reopened cold cases in 6 other states, all thanks to evidence first uncovered by Juno and Micah in that dusty basement of the old community center. But beyond the headlines and official statements, something else changed, something quieter. In Crescent Falls, people started paying attention again. Neighbors knocked on doors just to check in. Churches created buddy systems for older members living alone. Teenagers signed up to mow the lawns of elderly residents for free. It wasn't just about prevention. It was about presence. And for Micah, it was about trust, trusting the instincts of a dog who refused to ignore what others forgot. As the sun set over Crescent Falls one cool autumn evening, Juno lay curled on the porch beside Micah's chair. Wind rustled the trees. Somewhere in town, laughter drifted out of an open window. Micah looked down at his partner, gently asleep. "You're not just a K9, he murmured. "You're the heartbeat of this town now." And deep down, he knew, it wasn't just about justice. It was about remembering. Thank you for following Juno's incredible journey through the mystery of Crescent Falls. This story was inspired by the resilience of those who never give up, the loyalty of animals who sense what we miss, and the quiet heroes in every community who pay attention when it matters most. Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if your dog led you to something your town wanted to forget? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more real and fictional stories of hope, courage, and the dogs who change everything.